There is a specific conversation that happens when someone mentions they are planning a trip to Australia. It begins with enthusiasm on both sides and then arrives fairly quickly at the list. The list of things in Australia that can kill you. The snakes, of which Australia has more venomous species than any other country on Earth. The spiders, including the Sydney funnel web, which is regarded by toxicologists as the most dangerous spider in the world, and which has the additional quality of being aggressive rather than merely venomous, a combination that most venomous creatures have the decency to avoid. The jellyfish, the saltwater crocodiles, the blue-ringed octopus, the stonefish, the cone snails, the sharks, the cassowary, which is not venomous, but is a 6-foot bird with a dagger-shaped claw that has killed people and that looks at close range like something a film production company would design for a horror film set in the Cretaceous period. The Australians, who have lived alongside all of this for their entire lives, regard the international preoccupation with their country's capacity for killing visitors with an amusement that contains underneath it a faint and well-controlled pride. Yes, they say, lots of things here can kill you. Statistically, almost none of them will. Come anyway. It is extraordinary. They are right on all counts. Australia is the world's 6th largest country by land area, the only nation to occupy an entire continent, and one of the most geologically ancient land masses on Earth. Its rocks in some places dating back 4.5 billion years to the formation of the planet itself. It is simultaneously a country of 26 million people with world-class cities, extraordinary food and wine, and one of the highest standards of living on Earth, and a vast, largely empty, frequently extreme natural environment of such age and strangeness and biological distinctiveness that naturalists who encounter it for the first time consistently describe it as the closest thing available to visiting another planet while remaining on this one. It is also a country of indigenous cultures whose depth and continuity make every other human cultural tradition on Earth look recent. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia have been living on this continent for at least 65,000 years, making them the oldest continuous civilization on Earth by a margin so large that the comparison is almost meaningless. What they have accumulated in that time, in terms of knowledge of the landscape, of the plants and animals and water sources and weather patterns and ecological relationships, encoded in a tradition of oral literature and ceremony and art and land management of extraordinary sophistication, represents one of the greatest bodies of human knowledge in existence and one of the most inadequately understood by the outside world. This is Australia. It is going to take some time. Start with Sydney, because Sydney is where most people arrive and where Australia makes its first extremely confident argument for itself. Sydney is a city that was designed by geography rather than planners, and the geography, to be fair to the planners who never got the chance, did an extraordinary job. The harbour, Port Jackson, is one of the finest natural harbours in the world, a drowned river valley that the sea entered when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, creating a network of bays and inlets and headlands of such intricate and beautiful geography that the city built around and above it has, simply by occupying the space, acquired a physical setting that most cities would not be able to manufacture with unlimited resources and the best architects money can hire. The Sydney Opera House sits on Bennelong Point at the edge of the harbour, its sail-shaped shells of precast concrete rising from a granite podium above the water, in a form so specific and so immediately recognizable that it functions as the visual shorthand for an entire country in the way that very few buildings function as the shorthand for cities, let alone nations. The building was designed by the Danish architect Jørn Utzon, who won the International Design Competition in 1957, with a scheme that was at the time of winning almost certainly not buildable in any practically achievable way, the structural engineering required to realize the shell forms not yet existing. The engineering was subsequently developed. The building was built between 1959 and 1973. Utzon resigned in 1966 following a dispute with the New South Wales government over money and design control, and never saw the completed building. And the result of this extended, expensive, politically fraught, architecturally revolutionary process is one of the most successful pieces of public architecture built anywhere in the world in the 20th century. It is, as buildings go, enormously worth the trouble it caused. The Sydney Harbour Bridge, connecting the city centre to the North Shore since 1932, is the widest long-span bridge in the world, and one of those pieces of infrastructure that has become so embedded in the identity of its city that imagining Sydney without it is like imagining Rome without the Colosseum. The bridge can be climbed, the arch accessible to guided groups who ascend to the summit 134 meters above the harbour water, and the view from the top, the harbour below, the Opera House on its point, the city extending in every direction, the Pacific visible to the east, is one of the finest urban panoramas available to a paying visitor anywhere on Earth. The climb itself takes approximately 3.5 hours and involves a safety harness and a breathalyzer test before departure. The latter requirement being the most specifically Australian safety precaution in a country that has given considerable thought to safety precautions. Bondi Beach is the most famous beach in Australia, and possibly the most famous beach in the world, a curved arc of golden sand between two headlands in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, backed by the cafes and apartment buildings of a suburb that has built its entire identity around the beach below it. It is not the most beautiful beach in Australia. It is not the best beach in Australia. It is not even necessarily the best beach in Sydney. What it is the beach that best expresses a particular quality of Australian coastal life. Democratic, physically active, aesthetically confident, not particularly impressed by its own fame, and operating as a social institution as much as a geographical feature. On a summer weekend, Bondi is as much a performance of Australian beach culture as it is an actual beach, and the performance, it should be said, is entirely convincing. The food of Sydney reflects the city's position on the Pacific Rim and its genuinely cosmopolitan population in ways that make it one of the most interesting places to eat in the Southern Hemisphere. The Chinese food in the suburbs of Chinatown and Haymarket, the Vietnamese restaurants of Cabramatta, the Japanese food of the city centre and Surrey Hills, the Lebanese and Turkish food of Lakemba. Sydney's migrant communities have been cooking their own food in their own neighbourhoods since their arrival, and the result is a city where authentic versions of half the major cuisines of Asia are available within the metropolitan area at prices that reflect the competition of a genuinely diverse food culture. The seafood, drawn from the waters immediately adjacent to the city, is extraordinary. Sydney rock oysters, a species endemic to the estuaries of southeastern Australia, eaten with nothing or with a squeeze of lemon in the kind of simplicity that good oysters demand, are among the finest bivalves in the world, a judgment that Sydney's oyster aficionados hold with the quiet certainty of people who have been making the comparison for years and have consistently arrived at the same conclusion. The Rocks, the sandstone headland at the foot of the Harbour Bridge that was the first site of European settlement in Australia in 1788, is now a preserved historic precinct of early colonial sandstone buildings that sit in somewhat uncomfortable proximity to the gleaming towers of the central business district above them. The physical juxtaposition of the first permanent European structures in Australia with the financial infrastructure of a 21st century global city, expressing something specific about the compressed timeline of Australian colonial history. The Museum of Contemporary Art on the Rocks waterfront, the Customs House opposite, the weekend market in the cobbled lanes. The area has been thoroughly gentrified in the way that historically significant urban areas adjacent to major financial districts tend to be gentrified, and the result is comfortable and attractive and somewhat sanitized, which is perhaps the best available outcome for a precinct that began as a convict settlement. Melbourne makes the argument that it is the cultural capital of Australia, and Sydney finds this argument irritating, and both cities are right in their own way, which is exactly the kind of situation that keeps the rivalry going. Melbourne is Australia's second largest city and its most self-consciously cultured, a city built by the Victorian gold rush and the wool trade into a wealth that funded grand public buildings, cultural institutions, and a civic infrastructure whose ambition still defines the urban character of the centre. The State Library of Victoria, the National Gallery of Victoria, the Royal Exhibition Building that was the site of the opening of the first Australian Parliament in 1901 and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These are institutions built by a city that was, briefly, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, and that spent that wealth on the things wealthy cities in the Victorian era spent their wealth on, which was primarily the projection of cultural seriousness through stone and mortar. The Melbourne that most visitors engage with today is less the grand Victorian institutions than the city that has grown around and through them. The laneway culture, the coffee culture, the arts and music scene, and the food scene that together constitute the contemporary identity of a city that has rebuilt its self-image from post-industrial decline into something that the travel and lifestyle media has been describing with reasonable justification as one of the world's most livable cities for the better part of 3 decades. The coffee culture deserves specific attention because in Melbourne it is not merely a cultural preference but a civic religion, practiced with a theological intensity that visitors from other coffee-drinking cities find both impressive and slightly alarming. Melbourne claims to have invented the flat white, a claim disputed by New Zealand with a passion inversely proportional to the significance of the underlying question, and the city's specialty coffee scene, its independent roasters and its neighborhood cafes, and the specific vocabulary of milk ratios and extraction times and bean provenance that its residents deploy when ordering, represents a level of collective expertise in a single beverage category that is genuinely unusual. The espresso here is, consistently and measurably, among the best in the world, a fact that the city is aware of and that it communicates with the particular Melbourne combination of confidence and understatement that is one of the city's more charming qualities. The laneway culture, the transformation of Melbourne's network of narrow service lanes behind the main streets into a destination of bars, restaurants, street art and independent retail, is the urban development phenomenon that cities around the world have been attempting to replicate since Melbourne demonstrated that the spaces between buildings can be as valuable as the buildings themselves. Hosier Lane, its walls entirely covered in constantly changing street art, is the most photographed laneway but not the only interesting one. De Grave Street, Centre Place, AC/DC Lane, named for the band that formed in Melbourne in 1973, the Union Lane. Each has its own character and its own constituency, the laneways collectively functioning as Melbourne's most distinctive public realm and its most persuasive argument to visitors that a city built on a grid of wide Victorian streets can also have the kind of intimate, accidental, constantly evolving urban texture that grids are supposed to prevent. The food of Melbourne is the most diverse and most seriously engaged with of any Australian city, a product of the successive waves of migration that have made Victoria, and Melbourne in particular, the most multicultural state in Australia. The Italian community that arrived in the post-war decades established a food culture that transformed Melbourne's relationship with coffee and pasta and gelato, and that remains visible in the Lygon Street restaurants of Carlton, the city's Little Italy, where the original migrant establishments sit alongside more recent arrivals in a precinct that is simultaneously a heritage site and a functioning neighborhood. The Vietnamese community of Footscray, the Greek community of Oakley, the Chinese community of Box Hill, the Ethiopian and Eritrean restaurants of the inner suburbs. Melbourne's food geography is a map of its migration history, and eating through it is one of the most efficient available methods of understanding how the city became what it is. The Melbourne Cricket Ground, the MCG, is the largest sports stadium in the Southern Hemisphere and the 4th largest in the world, with a capacity of 100,000 people. On the days when it fills, which for the AFL Grand Final happens every September, and for the Boxing Day Test match against England happens every other year or so, it produces an atmosphere that people who experience it describe with the specific vocabulary of events that exceed ordinary scale. Australian rules football, the sport developed in Melbourne in the 1850s and now the dominant winter sport in the southern states, is not immediately comprehensible to international visitors. Its combination of elements from rugby, Gaelic football, and something that appears to have been invented specifically to confuse people who arrived with knowledge of other football codes, producing a game that requires several matches of observation before the logic becomes apparent, and that, once apparent, is one of the most athletically spectacular team sports played anywhere in the world. The Great Ocean Road is the drive that Australians make when they want to show someone what the country's coastline can do, and what the country's coastline can do is considerable. The 243-kilometre road runs along the southeastern coast of Victoria from Torquay, south of Melbourne, to Allansford near Warrnambool, carved into the cliff face above the Southern Ocean between 1919 and 1932 by returned soldiers as a memorial to those who did not return from the First World War, which makes it the world's largest war memorial, as well as one of its most spectacular coastal drives. The dedication of the construction, the labor-intensive carving of a road into clifftops above an ocean that was at the time actively hostile to access, gives the road a weight of human history that sits beneath its more immediately apparent natural drama. The 12 Apostles are the geological features that have become the most reproduced images of the Great Ocean Road, limestone stacks rising from the Southern Ocean at the edge of Port Campbell National Park, their soft rock eroded by the waves into columns that stand separated from the cliff face in various stages of a geological process that is still underway. There were never 12 of them. The current count is 8. With the number having reduced by 1 in 2005 when one of the stacks collapsed into the sea, an event that was witnessed by tourists on the viewing platform above and that was, by all accounts, the most spectacular piece of involuntary geological tourism anyone had observed at that location. The stacks that remain are between 20 and 45 meters high, their coloring shifting through the day as the light changes and as the Southern Ocean, which is not a particularly gentle sea in any weather, moves around and between them. The road itself passes through the surf beaches of Torquay and Bells Beach, where the Rip Curl Pro Surfing competition has been held since 1961, and where the surfing culture that has shaped so much of Australian coastal identity began its organised existence. It passes through the rainforest of the Otway Ranges, where the road drops from the clifftops into a landscape of tree ferns and myrtle beach and mountain ash that is entirely unexpected on a coastal drive, and that produces the specific pleasant disorientation of encountering a temperate rainforest where you expected more ocean. It passes through fishing villages and surf towns and stretches of cliff walk that allow the ocean to be experienced at a scale and with an immediacy that the car window does not provide, and that the Southern Ocean, blowing in from Antarctica with nothing between it and the coastline for approximately 5,000 kilometers, delivers with a force that makes abstract descriptions of wind speeds suddenly very concrete. Queensland is the state where the two most extraordinary natural environments in Australia exist in immediate proximity to each other: the Great Barrier Reef offshore and the wet tropics rainforest immediately inland, a pairing of ecosystems so significant that both are UNESCO World Heritage Sites and that together represent a concentration of natural heritage value matched nowhere else on Earth. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest coral reef system in the world, stretching 2,300 kilometers along the northeastern coast of Queensland, visible from space, containing over 900 islands and 3,000 individual reef systems, and housing an estimated 900 species of fish, 130 species of sharks and rays, 30 species of whales and dolphins, and 6 of the world's 7 species of marine turtle. These are numbers of a scale that makes the reef not merely a natural feature but a functioning ecosystem of planetary significance, one of the primary marine carbon sinks, and one of the most productive marine environments on Earth. The reef is also in serious trouble, and any honest description of it requires saying this directly rather than burying it in qualifications. Coral bleaching events, in which elevated sea temperatures cause corals to expel the algae that give them their color and provide their nutrition, have become more frequent and more severe as global ocean temperatures rise. The 2016 and 2017 bleaching events affected approximately half the coral in the northern and central sections of the reef, and subsequent events have continued the damage. The Australian Institute of Marine Science, which monitors the reef's health, has documented a long-term decline in coral cover in the reef's northern sections that represents a genuine ecological crisis. The reef that visitors see today is still extraordinary, still among the finest marine environments on Earth, and still worth the journey. But it is a diminished version of what existed 20 years ago, and the trajectory of that diminution is the most significant conservation issue currently facing Australia. Cairns is the city that serves as the primary gateway to the reef, a tropical city of around 150,000 people that has organized its entire economy around the reef experience. And the range of that experience is broader than the most common version of it, the day trip on a fast catamaran to a pontoon on the outer reef, suggests. Liveaboard dive trips to the Coral Sea, the deep water environment beyond the outer reef where the density and size of marine life increases dramatically, and encounters with hammerhead sharks, oceanic mantas, and schools of fish of a scale not seen on the inner reef become routine features of the daily dive log. Snorkeling from the shore at Low Isles, a coral cay where the reef is accessible directly from the beach. Sea kayaking through the Whitsunday Islands, the archipelago of 74 islands halfway down the Queensland coast, where the combination of national park protection, white silica beaches of unusual purity, and the reef accessible by short boat trip produces a sailing and kayaking environment of the first order. The Daintree Rainforest, north of Cairns, is the oldest continuously surviving tropical rainforest on Earth, having existed without glaciation or significant climatic disruption for at least 180 million years. A period that encompasses the extinction of the dinosaurs and the subsequent evolution of all mammalian life on Earth. It contains plant families that predate the evolution of flowering plants, fern species that have survived since the Jurassic, and a biological complexity that reflects the uninterrupted length of its existence in a way that younger forests, even very old ones, do not. The crocodiles in the Daintree River are saltwater crocodiles, the largest reptilian predators on Earth, and they are present in numbers and at a scale that the river's water tours make clearly and specifically visible, the guides pointing out individuals of 3, 4, and 5 meters lying on the riverbanks with the calm authority of people who have been doing this daily for years and who have calibrated precisely how close is appropriate. The Red Centre is the part of Australia that most visitors know from photographs and that most visitors do not visit. A geographic paradox that reflects the reality of a country where the most dramatic interior landscape is also the most logistically challenging to reach. Uluru, the sandstone monolith rising 348 meters from the flat red desert of the Northern Territory, is one of the most immediately recognizable natural features on Earth and one of the most thoroughly inadequate to describe. The photographs are accurate in their details and misleading in their effect. The color, the scale, the quality of light, the physical presence of something this large and this ancient in a landscape this flat, produces an experience that the photographs record but do not convey. Standing at the base of Uluru in the early morning as the light begins to change, the rock cycling through colors from grey-purple to orange to red to ochre as the sun rises and the shadows shift, is an encounter with something that is simultaneously a geological feature and a cultural landscape of the deepest significance. Uluru is the sacred heart of the Anangu people, the traditional owners of the land, whose connection to this place goes back at least 10,000 years and whose relationship with the rock, which they call Uluru, not Ayers Rock, the European name applied in 1873 after Henry Ayers, the then Chief Secretary of South Australia, a man who had never seen it, and who contributed nothing to the landscape beyond the administrative convenience of having a European name available for the maps, is one of living spiritual significance rather than historical sentiment. The Anangu requested for decades that visitors not climb the rock, a request that the Australian government finally made legally binding in 2019 when climbing was permanently closed, a decision received with some controversy by those who had climbed it and considered the experience a personal achievement, and with quiet satisfaction by those who understood that the achievement in question had been made at the expense of the people for whom the rock is sacred. The Kata Tjuta, or the Olgas, the collection of 36 domed rock formations a few kilometers west of Uluru, are less famous than Uluru, and arguably more spectacular in the breadth of the experience they offer. The walks through the gorges between the domes producing an encounter with the scale of the formations that the open viewing of Uluru from outside does not. The Valley of the Winds Walk, a 10-kilometer circuit through the heart of the Kata Tjuta, takes visitors between dome walls that rise hundreds of meters on either side, the silence broken only by the wind through the gorge and the sound of whatever wildlife is currently occupying the landscape, which in the Red Centre may include the Perenti, Australia's largest lizard at up to 2.5 meters, and the wedge-tailed eagle, the largest bird of prey in Australia, circling on thermals above the formations at heights that make it visible from the floor of the gorge as a small, dark shape riding the air with the specific quality of effortlessness that large birds of prey display when they are not doing anything in particular and are simply existing at altitude. Kings Canyon in Watarka National Park, a gorge cut into the George Gill Range with walls rising 300 meters in places, offers a rim walk that is one of the finest short walks in the Red Centre, the combination of the geological drama of the canyon walls, the Garden of Eden, a sheltered valley with a permanent waterhole that supports a palm oasis in the middle of the desert, and the extraordinary views from the rim across the surrounding ranges, providing an experience that repays the effort of reaching it, which in a landscape this remote and this hot is always genuine effort rather than the more casual category of walking that the term short walk suggests in more temperate and accessible environments. Western Australia is the state that Australians from the eastern states treat as a foreign country, partly because it takes as long to fly there from Sydney as it takes to fly to Singapore, and partly because it genuinely is, in its landscape, its character, and its relationship with the rest of the continent, something quite distinct from the Eastern Australia that most international visitors experience. Perth is the most remote major city in the world, further from another major city than any comparable metropolitan area on Earth, a fact that has given it a particular character of self-sufficiency and self-containment that the city wears lightly, but that runs deep. It is a city of sunshine and beaches and a Swan River waterfront of considerable beauty, and it is a city that has been transformed by the resources boom of the early 21st century in ways that are visible in its architecture and its restaurant scene, and the wealth that flows through its economy from the iron ore and lithium and gold and gas that Western Australia extracts from the ground in quantities that make it one of the most resource-rich jurisdictions on Earth. Margaret River, 3 hours south of Perth, is one of the finest wine regions in Australia and one of the most comprehensively beautiful. Its Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay among the most internationally regarded wines produced in the Southern Hemisphere, and its combination of vineyard landscape, surfing beaches at the Southern Ocean coast, karri forest and cave systems making it one of the most varied regional destinations in the country. The caves of the Margaret River region, including Mammoth Cave and Lake Cave, are limestone formations of considerable beauty that the damp climate of the southwest of Western Australia has decorated with stalactites and stalagmites and cave coral of exceptional quality. The Kimberley, the vast northwestern region of Western Australia that covers an area roughly the size of Germany and has a permanent population of around 40,000 people, is one of the last genuinely wild places on Earth accessible to visitors who are not prepared to be genuinely expeditionary. The Bungles in Purnululu National Park, the spectacular beehive-shaped sandstone towers striped in orange and black that were unknown to non-Indigenous Australians until 1983, and that became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2003, are accessible by four-wheel drive or by light aircraft and represent a landscape of such visual improbability that they have been repeatedly described as looking digitally generated, which is the modern equivalent of the 19th century traveler's description of something looking painted, and which means, in both cases, that the landscape looks too extraordinary to be real. The horizontal falls in Talbot Bay, where the tidal flow of the ocean is forced through two narrow gorges in the McClarty Range, creating a waterfall that flows horizontally rather than vertically, the water level on one side of each gorge being several meters higher than the other as the tide pushes through, is one of the most specifically unusual natural phenomena in Australia and one of the most difficult to reach, accessible primarily by seaplane or by boat from the remote town of Derby, which itself requires flying to from Perth. The effort required to see it is precisely what ensures that the experience of seeing it remains something that the relatively small number of people who make the journey describe with the disproportionate enthusiasm of those who have gone further than most and found the destination worth every kilometre. Tasmania, the island state separated from the Australian mainland by the Bass Strait, is the part of Australia that most Australian mainlanders have not been to, and that most Australian mainlanders would describe, if pressed, with a mixture of affection and vagueness that reflects both the genuine appeal of a place they have always meant to visit and the persistent failure to actually do so. Tasmania is roughly the size of Ireland, densely forested, cooler and wetter than the mainland states, and home to some of the most significant wilderness in the Southern Hemisphere. 40% of the island is protected in national parks and reserves, a proportion of protected land that reflects both the extraordinary quality of the wilderness and the decades of conservation campaigning that resisted and eventually stopped the development proposals that would have flooded, logged and mined much of what was saved. The Tasmanian wilderness, particularly in the southwest of the island, the wild rivers, the button grass plains, the ancient Huon pine forests where individual trees 2,000 years old still stand, the Cradle Mountain Lake St. Clair National Park with its dolerite peaks and glacial lakes, is of a quality that serious wilderness travelers consistently rank among the finest in the world. The Overland Track, the 105-kilometre walking route between Cradle Mountain and Lake St. Clair, is the most famous multi-day walk in Australia and one of the most respected in the world. Its 6 to 8 day duration and its route through some of the most remote and changeable weather landscape in Australia, providing an experience of genuine wilderness immersion that the more accessible sections of the national park, beautiful as they are, do not replicate. Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art in Hobart, is the thing that changed Tasmania's cultural reputation internationally, and that changed Hobart's self-understanding in the process. Built by the art collector and professional gambler David Walsh into the side of a dolerite cliff above the Derwent River, Mona is one of the most extraordinary private art museums in the world. Its collection combining ancient Egyptian antiquities with contemporary art of the most challenging variety. Its architecture integrating the museum into the rock face so completely that arriving at it by ferry from Hobart and approaching it from the water is already one of the most effective pieces of museum arrival choreography available anywhere. The Dark MOFO Winter Festival, held each June in the deep cold of the Tasmanian winter, has become one of the most anticipated arts events in Australia. Walsh himself, who built the museum with gambling winnings and who communicates with the museum's visitors through a digital guide of such irreverent intelligence that it has been described as the best museum text in the world, is as much a cultural phenomenon as the institution he created. The food of Tasmania, built on the extraordinary quality of produce from the island's clean air, cold water and fertile agricultural land, has become one of the most discussed and most sought after in Australia. The oysters from Bruny Island and the Huon Valley, the salmon from the aquaculture farms in the south, the beef and lamb from the cool climate pastures, the cheese from the artisan producers who have established themselves throughout the island, the whiskey from the distilleries that have made Tasmania the most acclaimed whiskey-producing region in Australia. These are products of a specific environment that produces quality as a natural consequence of its conditions rather than as the result of human effort alone, though the human effort is also considerable and is getting more sophisticated by the year. The Australian Outback, the vast interior of the continent that comprises the majority of its land area and the smallest fraction of its population, is the part of Australia that most visitors never reach, and that most Australians never spend significant time in, and that nevertheless defines something essential about the national character and the national imagination. The Outback is not a single landscape. It is a collection of different arid and semi-arid environments, the red sand dunes of the Simpson Desert, the stony Gibber Plains of the Tirari Desert, the salt lakes of South Australia that appear blue on satellite images and white and dry on the ground, the mulga scrub and the Mitchell grass downs of Queensland, the spinifex grasslands of Western Australia. All of these are the outback in different moods and different geological formations, and the quality they share is primarily the scale of the sky and the distance to the next human habitation. The light in the Australian outback at sunrise and sunset is a phenomenon that landscape photographers describe with the urgency of people who have found the thing they have been looking for. The red soil, the golden grasses, the blue-grey of the saltbush, the terracotta of the sandstone formations. In the hour before sunset, these colors intensify to a degree that feels almost theatrical, as if the landscape has been lit from below rather than above, the low-angle light catching every surface at the most revealing angle and producing a warmth of color and depth of shadow that the midday light entirely suppresses. Then the sun goes down, the light goes very quickly in the way that it goes very quickly at these latitudes, and the stars appear in a sky that has no light pollution within hundreds of kilometers, and that displays, accordingly, the full arm of the Milky Way and the Magellanic Clouds, and the density of stars that human beings spent all of their evolutionary history looking at, and that most people alive today have never seen because there is too much light between them and the sky. The Aboriginal traditions of reading this sky, the astronomical knowledge encoded in the oral literature and the ceremony and the artwork of the world's oldest cultures, represents a body of astronomical observation accumulated over 65,000 years that is only now beginning to be studied seriously by Western science, the confluence of the two knowledge systems producing results that are expanding the understanding of both. The dark constellations of the Aboriginal astronomical tradition, the shapes found not in the stars but in the dark patches of the Milky Way, the emu in the sky whose seasonal position was used to determine when the emus on the ground would be laying eggs, are a different way of reading the same sky, a way developed by people who had 65,000 years to pay attention. Australia is not an easy country to summarize, and it does not particularly invite summarizing, having spent the last 65,000 years being itself in ways that predate the concept of summaries by a considerable margin. It is a country of extraordinary natural diversity, from the coral reefs of Queensland to the glacial lakes of Tasmania, from the red desert of the interior to the temperate rainforests of the southwest, from the tropical monsoon forests of the Kimberley to the alpine environments of the snowy mountains, all of it within the borders of a single country, and most of it still functioning at a level of ecological integrity that comparable environments in more densely settled parts of the world have largely lost. It is a country of complex and unresolved history, the 236 years since European settlement representing, in the context of the 65,000 years of indigenous occupation that preceded it, a fraction so small as to be almost invisible, and the relationship between those two histories, the oldest continuous civilization on Earth and one of the youngest settler nations, is the most significant and most contested element of the Australian national conversation, one that the country is working through with a combination of genuine progress and genuine difficulty that is nobody's idea of an easy or finished process. It is a country whose cities are, by the measures that matter to the people who live in them, among the finest in the world. Livable, diverse, spectacularly located, served by food cultures of unusual quality, and set in a climate that allows the outdoor life that Australians have built their national self-image around to be conducted with a frequency and a variety that the climates of most comparable cities do not permit. And it is a country that, for all the things in it that can kill you, which remain numerous and specific and probably warrant at least a brief consultation of the relevant literature before you go hiking in the bush, is a country that receives visitors with the particular warmth of a place that is aware of how far they have come and is genuinely glad they made the effort. Go. Look at the reef while it is still the reef. Walk through the Daintree while it is still the oldest forest on Earth. Stand at the base of Uluru in the early morning and pay attention. Eat the oysters in Tasmania and the coffee in Melbourne, and the barbecued prawns somewhere near the water in Queensland on a warm evening with a cold beer, which is not the sophisticated culinary recommendation that some other items on this list represent, but which is, in its own unpretentious way, one of the finest eating experiences Australia has to offer. The continent that decided to be a country has been waiting for you. It is very large and it is very patient, and it has at last count more things worth seeing than any single trip can contain. Start somewhere. Go back. Repeat as necessary.